when you break down the sort of like three, I think you sort of outlined three sort of like forces that are working to shape this, to shape what the country's ultimately going to become. The continentalists, the state sovereigntists, and then just sort of like the idea of democracy. And if democracy is represented by like what we see in these rebellions, and this sort of burgeoning movement of like, hey, the people who have all the rights, maybe they should be paying a little bit more in terms of taxes, and they have these rights obviously because of their property and whatnot. What just I'm a little bit unclear on the continentalists versus the state sovereigntists. What's the dynamic there, and who represents that?
Well, early on, in the Continental Congress during the Revolution, it wasn't clear at all. It wasn't a majority opinion necessarily at all, or a consensus opinion, I guess I should say, that the country was going to become a nation, have a national government. The Continental Congress really was not a national government. It was a representative government representing state legislatures, not people. So it acted on people indirectly through the state legislatures, but it was not a national government operating again on all citizens throughout the country. Hamilton wanted that, and he called it continentalism, and he was by no means alone. Washington wanted it. Hamilton's father-in-law Schuyler wanted it. John Jay, James Madison at that time was on Hamilton's side. There were a lot of people who wanted it, and then there were a lot of people who thought, no, we're fighting Britain because they violated our state legislature's powers. Why would we give up those powers now to a national government? So within the governing elite, you have this absolute conflict, which later on becomes kind of like the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And after that, it becomes, and sometimes it's seen as the Jeffersonians versus the Hamiltonians. And then I'm saying, and we look at the whole country's history and sort of the psychology of the country. And we say, oh, it's basically Hamilton versus Jefferson. That's been our sort of dilemma throughout the history. Hamiltonians versus Jeffersonians. I'm kind of saying, yeah, there's that. But there's this third force that nobody wants to talk about, which represents the majority of free laboring people in the country. Maybe you might call it the white working class of the day, that movement I was just talking about, which actually obsessed Hamilton and compelled his attention because he wanted to crush it. So I'm really trying to say that it's not a binary. There's really three forces. There's two forces in the governing elite that are at each other's throats. And then there's a third force that each of those two governing elite forces have a kind of a funky relationship with. And that's kind of what I'm tracing.
Do those two forces within the elite, do they have a different ideological perspective, or are all three on some level? This is just when you're at the beginning of a country, is it far more fights between sort of like material stakes than some type of ideological ones? That's
a really key, issue. I mean, yes, there was ideological difference, certainly among the Continentalist and State Sovereigntist points of view, the people who became the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Jeffersonians and the Hamiltonians, major ideological differences. But it's also interesting to look at, like, when, say, James Madison breaks with Hamilton, goes up against him once Hamilton is Treasury Secretary. They've worked together on bringing about the Constitution, but then they break up, and it's pretty painful. And Madison goes after the central bank, or the national bank, I should call it, that Hamilton feels is critically important to bringing about all the things that he thought were important about the Constitution. Madison calls it unconstitutional. That's an ideological argument. I mean, it's fundamental. It's like, it's not just, Madison's not saying I hate banking. He's saying it's unconstitutional for there to be a national bank. And Hamilton's like, what? No, it's not. So that's a powerful ideological conflict. But it's really interesting to see that Madison also was representing, Virginians, people from the South, who didn't like national banking because they actually still wanted to remain private lenders, and they didn't want competition from a national bank. So there's a material interest of great importance to the people who also had the ideology against the bank. So I think that you get these material interests mixed with material interests, and it's very hard to extricate one from another throughout the whole period.
And from what would have been the ideological basis, one way or another, for saying that there should be a government bank or not a government bank, a federal government, a federal central bank that was not independent, let's say?
Well, Hamilton's point of view would have been that in the Constitution, if there are things that should be done, like collect taxes and pay interest on bonds and all the things that the federal government is empowered to do, then whatever systems you need to create to enable that are not unconstitutional, so they're constitutional. And Madison's idea was nothing. Suddenly, his idea is what happened. I mean, his idea hadn't been this before, but suddenly his idea became anything not explicit, any power not explicitly enumerated in the document is unconstitutional. The necessary and proper clause, which is what Hamilton was relying on, does not mean you can just do anything you want. I don't think it's necessarily to have like a bank in order to be able to collect taxes, so it's not covered. And so then it becomes prohibited in his ideology. And we live with this. That was an amazing moment because Hamilton didn't even see that coming, because Madison had never taken this position before. He'd always taken the opposite position. But when he turned politically against Hamilton, he put forth a constitutional theory that we still take seriously today, even though later, when Madison became president, he supported rechartering the bank and backed off all that. So again, where do politics, partisan politics, material interests, and ideology come together? It's like it's all balled up, and it's really hard to sort out.
Madison of that moment, I think, would find some solace with probably like Gorsuch and maybe Clarence Thomas these days, in terms of like the federal government doing anything in service of anything.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea that is taken seriously by many people, that there's a legitimate ideology around, I mean, of course, the federal government's power is limited. I mean, of course, we want power to be limited. But the idea that, I mean, early on, it was like the anti-federalists who had at first said, oh, this government's overpowered. It's over-empowered. We can't ratify the Constitution. Suddenly, they changed their tack, and they said things that we do hear today from people in high places, that not as only is it not overly empowered, it can't do anything, which all happened like they turned on a dime, really, and did a 180 in a few months to develop that ideology, which people stand on to this day.
And then Albert Gallatin comes in following Hamilton and basically goes on a project to undo what Hamilton did. Was he doing this again? Was this in service of democracy, or was it just in service of, I got a different bunch of friends who are landowners?
Well, that's a complicated issue. So, right. So try to pull those things apart. Actually, I think Gallatin, he was kind of a centrist in certain ways. Like, he came in with the Jeffersonians, and he was a committed Jeffersonian, and he was Jefferson's Treasury Secretary. And then he was Madison's Treasury Secretary. So he was Treasury Secretary longer than Hamilton, because he was in 2 administrations, and each of those administrations was 2 terms. He didn't go all the way to the end of Madison's second term, or all the way through Madison's first term. I can't remember right now. I don't have my book in front of me. But yeah, he was in 2 administrations and had a huge impact on the country. And his job was, Jefferson told him, okay, good, you got the job. Go in there today, dismantle everything Hamilton did. Just throw it out and build the right thing. And tell me everything he did wrong and all his mistakes and everything. And we're just going to throw it all out. Can't throw the bank out because it's got a longer charter, but everything else. And when the charter comes up, we'll get rid of that too. Gallatin was not that extreme. He was a Jeffersonian, but he actually had a very interesting kind of middle position, where he went into work at the Treasury office and was like, wow, you can't just shut this down. The whole country will fall apart. He had to go back and tell Jefferson, it's a house of cards. If you pull one piece of this out, the whole thing's going to fall apart. So what he did, because he was an incredibly patient person, at a time when nobody else was, it seems to me, he sat there for years, year after year after year, staying in Washington, staying at his desk in the heat in the summer and humidity, smoking cigars and sitting at his desk and working to whittle down the public debt. Not just throw it out, whittle it down, whittle it down, whittle it down. And the amazing thing, one of the amazing things, is that that's the period where Jefferson, who had come in on this anti-tax, small government kind of deal, that's when he did the Louisiana Purchase, which had to be financed. And that's when they started having wars that had to be financed. And Gallatin's sitting there managing this kind of Jeffersonian ideological extremism combined with Jefferson not doing Jeffersonian things, doing un-Jeffersonian things, and focusing on whittling down the debt, which took incredible discipline. And he did very well for a long time. But his arc ends up being, to me, another one of the sort of tragic arcs of that period, because in the end, his own party, the Jeffersonians, now called the Republicans, his own party turned against him. And so he ends up really unable to complete his tasks. And he's just dealing with, they want to have the War of 1812, but they don't want to pay for it. And he's like, if you want to have this war, you've got to pay for it, which means we need taxes, which means we need to do the Hamiltonian type of things. And they're like, oh, he's a Hamiltonian. He was stuck in the end. So it's another career that has an arc that's not always happy, but I think really dramatic and really interesting.
Okay, so lastly, Hamilton's legacy, like where do we see that today outside of, the Broadway musical?
The funny thing is that the Broadway musical, as unpredictable as it was and as impactful and so forth as it was, seeming to come out of nowhere, was really the cherry on top, in a way, of a long period of building up Hamilton's reputation again in policy circles, federal government policy circles in the 1990s during the Clinton administration. Robert Rubin and people like that in Clinton's administration they found inspiration in Hamilton. The George W. Bush administration, his Secretary of Treasury Paulson was a Hamilton fan, and then that crosses over during the financial crisis in 2008 when Obama comes in, and the incoming Obama administration starts working with the outgoing Bush administration to wrestle with the financial crisis, and Hamilton was a huge influence on them, a huge impact on them. They lionized this particular founder.
What part of it was it?
Was
it the regressive nature of Hamiltonian policies? I mean, what was it, or just the veneration of finance?
They wouldn't call it the regressive nature, and I don't know that their understanding of Hamilton was the same as mine. So no, but the veneration was for the bailout, for like he was Mr. Bailout. Timothy Geithner referred to Hamilton as Mr. Bailout. He was and so how do you save a financial system? How do you heroically save a financial system? And then, was the interest in making sure that every small person, ordinary person thrown out of their home, make them whole? Or was the thing to save, make sure the companies that are too big to fail don't fail?
Right.
You do get it.
It's the centering of finance as a first order, like an end, like a means in and of itself, versus, or I should say, an ends in and of itself versus a means to embetter people on some level.
Yeah, I mean, the rationale would be the whole country's going to fall apart. There's not going to be milk on the shelves next week if you don't do this, which Paulson kept coming into Congress and saying, actually. And then there was milk on the shelves the next week, and the congressmen are like, you told us there was going to be no milk on the shelves if we don't do what you say. So, I don't think they think of it as like, we don't care about ordinary people. We just care about finance as its own self-generating engine. I think they think it's good for the country, obviously.
Well, they think but like I guess like the starkest difference to me is, do we pay off the banks for with their bad loans and say, and guys, do us a favor, make it easy on the homeowners? Or do we pay off the homeowners who have a obligation to give that money to the banks? Like, you ensure that you bail out the homeowner, they're much more likely to pay off the banks than by bailing out the banks are much more likely to offer relief to the homeowners, because they still have their primary objective, which is to make as much money as possible from these transactions. And that's in fact what happened. And I wonder if I think they thought like, we need to protect the financial system to save the country, but their veneration of the financial system was so high that like if there's any margin of error, we got to get that money in the banks first, as opposed to because FDR did sort of the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
so
Yeah.
it's sort of just like an ideological perspective on how important finance is. And at the end of the day, it's like they're supposed to be there to service the homeowners on some level, not vice versa.
Yeah, and all the people we're talking about came from the finance world and went back to the finance world.
Yeah.
And so it's obviously going to affect their worldview. And yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party abandoned that whole FDRian thing, long before, really. And when Obama came in, he'd already given a speech to the Hamilton Project of Brookings that was set up by Robert Rubin, being very positive, a very well-received speech by the bankers and Wall Street people he was talking to, being very positive about Wall Street and big banking as the fundamental structure, underlying structure of how things work in the country. So it shouldn't have been a huge surprise, although I think to some people it was, the position that the administration took on bailing, how they bailed out.
William Hogeland, the book is, I have it. I want to get the whole title. I've lost it here on my shoot.
I can give you the whole title.
Yes, please do.
It's The Hamilton Scheme, an epic tale, which is what it is, of money and power in the founding period. In the founding period? In the American founding. In the American founding.
And your Substack's newsletter is Hogeland's Bad History. We will put a link to both those at majority.fm and our YouTube and podcast description. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Good conversation.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.